All right. At long last, we begin. We're starting late. I don't know what to tell you. Yeah. It's not the parade's fault. Don't worry. We always start late. It's better that way. All right. So we are continuing our quest through the book of Proverbs. We got through the second half of Proverbs 6 and most of Proverbs 7 last week, and we'll cover Proverbs 8 this week. We didn't get all the way through Proverbs 7, but I'm going to cover the rest of it in about 2 minutes, and then we're just going to hop on over to Proverbs 8. As I said before, and I always feel like I sound like a broken record every week, because I feel like I'm reminding you guys of stuff we've already talked about, but everyone has busy weeks, and I think we'll all survive. So, in the book of Proverbs, Solomon is trying to tell his son how to live a godly life, how to live a life that's characterized by godly wisdom and understanding. And he's talked a lot in the abstract about how wisdom is good, it will help you, you'll have a more blessed life, a happier life, you'll have peace. You need to focus on the things that actually matter, living your life according to God's wisdom. And that's all kind of, it's good stuff, but it's kind of abstract and up there in the clouds. So, as a way to bring this down to real life, Solomon reaches for a really, really practical area where you can choose between doing things your own way or by doing things God's way. So he chooses sexual immorality as the thing that he really wants to home in on. He talked about it in Proverbs chapter 5. In Proverbs 6, he talked about a few other things. He talked about a little bit about the practicality of not getting into debt in a rash and foolish way. He talked about the importance of being diligent, disciplined in your life, in your work and what you do out in the world, and in your, by implication, your spiritual life too. He talked about how God hates a wicked person, someone who goes around doing evil. He says that God hates someone who has haughty eyes, a lying tongue, hands that shed innocent blood, a heart that devises wicked plans, feet that make haste to run to evil, false witnesses who lie. And he especially hates someone who sows discord among brethren, meaning if you really want to see where the rubber meets the road, God particularly hates it when professing believers deliberately sow discord and gossip and strife and slander among fellow believers. So that looks like stirring up dissension in a church and a congregation, gossiping, pitting one faction against the other, trying to start cliques and being divisive on purpose. God particularly hates that. So after touching on those things, he talked in Proverbs 5 about sexual immorality already. He talks about those other few things briefly, and then he goes back in the middle of Proverbs 6 and talks about sexual immorality again. He really wants to hit hard on this issue because he's talking to his son, who's probably an adult, a young adult. I'm guessing somewhere around 20 years old or so, past the age where you can just order your children to do something and they have to obey you. So he's trying to persuade his son, beg his son, plead with his son to learn from his mistakes, and he really wants to hit on this idea of what does wisdom look like? It means, one example is not giving into sexual immorality. That's what he talked about in Proverbs 6. And in Proverbs 7, he gives this representative example about how sexual immorality can happen in his culture. And it can happen in our culture today in some circles. And I gave the example of being young and being in the military, especially if you're posted overseas, or being young and being in a college environment away from home around a bunch of people that are your own age, where you can, all the guardrails and restraints of your upbringing are now removed from you. And instead of having guardrails imposed upon you, you have to make a decision on whether you're going to keep those guardrails for yourself or just throw them away. And everyone knows that when you become 18 years old or whatever, and you go out on your own, many times people do foolish things and go wild and crazy to greater or lesser extent and do things they know they shouldn't do and make mistakes. And that's part of growing up and living your life and learning from your mistakes. And that's you at some point you have to make the faith that you've hopefully accepted as a child. You need to make a decision. There comes a time you need to make it your own and set up your own guardrails, because your parents' guardrails don't last forever. You have to make your own decisions and live your own life. So he gives this representative example in Proverbs 7 of a naive young man, not necessarily intellectually stupid, but just someone who's naive, not wise to the ways of the world, easy prey for someone who's just a naive person, just a young person. Sometimes, it's not your fault if you're naive, if you haven't gone through experiences. It's not your fault if you're young. This person is someone who hangs around, who doesn't have sense. If you look at Proverbs 7, this is this representative example Solomon shows you of how this kind of thing can trip up a young person and have long-lasting consequences. At the window of my house, I've looked out through my lattice. I've seen among the simple. I've perceived among the youths a young man lacking sense, passing along the street near her corner, taking the road to her house in the twilight, in the evening, at the time of night, in darkness. So that's setting the stage for a young guy, doesn't have a lot of sense, doesn't have a lot of godly wisdom, doesn't have the prudence that the guardrails in your life that a prudent person would have to stop you from falling into sin or not getting involved in situations that are going to make you be tempted to make bad and stupid decisions. So that's sort of the setup. And here in verses 10 through 23, he gives this representative example of this woman who's just looking to snag, who's just out there at nighttime looking to snag a guy who she can take back to her house and take to bed. She's married and she doesn't care. And I said this before, when you read this description and when you read Proverbs 5, Solomon is not saying that he hates women and all women are evil harlots who are out to seduce men. He's just giving a representative example of someone who is out there just trolling for pleasure, doesn't care where it comes from, and he's warning his son to avoid this, using this as an example to tell his son to avoid. There are men who do the same thing to young and naive women. So the shoe can go on both feet. His son is a man, so he uses the example of a woman. So no, Solomon does not hate women. In fact, not to be too tongue-in-cheek, I think the evidence points the opposite direction. So, starting with verse 10, this is this picture of this woman who's out there just trolling to look for a guy to take home. Behold, a woman meets him, dressed as a prostitute, wily of heart. She's loud and wayward. Her feet do not stay at home. Now in the street, now in the market, and at every corner she lies in wait. She seizes him and kisses him, and with bold face she says to him, I had to offer sacrifices, and today I've paid my vows. So now I come out to meet you, to seek you eagerly, and I found you. And this is where we stopped last week. And I asked, what's the deal with this mention of the sacrifices? And Marshall said, it's like a superficial religious justification. I've gone to the temple, I've made my free will offering, and I'm good with God now. Everything's good. Now that I've sort of filled up my gas tank with grace, we can go do whatever we want, and it's okay because I got my ticket punched earlier this morning. That's the kind of attitude that she's getting across. Sort of like today, it's sort of like someone today saying, it doesn't matter. We can do whatever we want tonight. I went to church this morning, and I'll just go next week and ask for forgiveness. So it's all good. It doesn't really matter. And that's what she says. And people might not want to put it that bluntly because it's not polite, but sometimes people think like that. Dick. Yeah, sometimes. And, the Roman Catholics are terribly wrong about confession and who they should confess to and everything else, but it's not a Catholic thing to have a cheap external view of God. It's a human thing, because people can go to church all over this world, and people can go to church here and just listen in some passive way and daydream about something else as I'm talking or as Pastor George is talking or whoever, and not really care about anything that's said. And you can go home, and if you do something wrong, you can think, well, it doesn't matter, I went to church. And of course, you might not ever, say it that bluntly to me or anyone else, but it's things that go through your head. I'll just repent later. It doesn't matter. So it's not a Catholic thing. It's a human thing. We try and it's easy to pervert the grace that God gives us. He gives us a way to have forgiveness, and it's easy to just take it for granted and think we could take advantage of it. In this case, she's talking about where is it? She's talking about peace offerings or fellowship offerings, which is talked about in Leviticus 3 and in part of Leviticus 7. And this is just a sacrifice to show God to maintain peace and fellowship with God. And she's saying, I did that this morning, so let's go home and go to bed. It doesn't really matter because I'm good. I got my ticket punched this morning. And that's where we left it. And now she says, and I've come out just to see you because you're so important to me. You're so handsome. You're so whatever. Insert fake compliment here. It doesn't matter. You get the idea. And again, a man can use this on a naive woman in the same way. And then she goes on, I've spread my couch with coverings, colored linens from Egyptian linen. I perfume my bed with myrrh, aloes, and cinnamon. So she's being just ridiculously forward. But there it is. Come, let us take our fill of love till morning. Let us delight ourselves with love. Now she's really being forward. She's basically saying, everything's ready. It's going to be great. Just come back and we'll just make love all night long. And then to sweeten the deal even further, she says, and my husband's not even here. He's going to be gone for a long time. So it doesn't even matter. And I don't think this kind of, I don't want to go too far into adult themes. I don't think this kind of approach would work if a man said this to a woman, but it could work if a woman said this to a young guy who lacks sense. I don't know many women who would, but anyway, I think this is an approach that could work with a young man. I don't think it's really an approach that would work with a young lady, but there it is. This is a representative example he's giving. She says, my husband's not at home. He's gone on a long journey. He took a bag full of money with him. At full moon, he'll come home, and he's not going to be home at least till sometime later in the month. So there's no possibility we'll be disturbed. Everything's wonderful. I got my ticket punched with God this morning. So come back with me to my place, and we're going to have a great time. So, and he sort of summarizes in 21 to 23, with much seductive speech, she persuades him with her smooth talk. She compels him, and at once he follows her as an ox goes to the slaughter or as a stag is caught fast till an arrow pierces its liver. As a bird rushes into a snare, he does not know that it will cost him his life. And then we talked about these analogies. Alec, did you get anything on your hunting trip?
Didn't even see anything.
That's too bad. Well, we talked about that, I think, last week because we were comparing these two analogies. So, like an animal that's about to be killed or caught in a trap and die. That's what this man is doing to himself by giving into this. And he wraps up in 24 to 27 with some final advice. The woman's sort of done talking now in his example, and this is Solomon saying, and now, O sons, listen to me, be attentive to the words of my mouth. Let not your heart turn aside to her ways, do not stray into her paths. For many a victim she's laid low, and all her slain are a mighty throng. Her house is the way to Sheol, going down to the chambers of death. So his point is to get his sons to think about how they're going to live their life and to run and flee away from temptation to do stupid and wicked things when these temptations come, and specifically with sexual immorality. So that's what he says. Any questions on Proverbs 7 or on this example or on the implications of what he's been saying in general? I think we spent 3 or 4 weeks talking about sexual immorality now. I'm anxious to go on to chapter 8, but any thoughts? Everyone's tired of sexual immorality as well. Okay, well, Solomon thought it was important, and I'm glad we covered it. Now on to chapter 8. Okay, he goes out, he goes back to the clouds at this point, back to the clouds, and talks about overarching things, and wants to talk about wisdom in verses 1 through 11. And here, he pictures wisdom as a woman who is asking for people to accept her. He does this so wisdom doesn't seem like an abstract thing, so it seems like a real thing that you can see and hold and grab hold of. So here he goes. I'll read verses 1 through 11, then we'll talk about it. Does not wisdom call? Does not understanding raise her voice? On the heights beside the way, at the crossroads she takes her stand, beside the gates in front of the town, at the entrance of the portals she cries aloud, to you, O men, I call, and my cry is to the children of man. O simple ones, learn prudence. O fools, learn sense. Hear, for I will speak noble things, and from my lips will come what is right. From my mouth will utter truth. Wickedness is an abomination to my lips. All the words of my mouth are righteous. There is nothing twisted or crooked in them. They're all straight to him who understands, and right to those who find knowledge. Take my instruction instead of silver, and knowledge rather than choice gold, for wisdom is better than jewels, and all that you may desire cannot compare with her. So, he's begging, Solomon's sort of talking as though he is wisdom, and he's begging his son to listen and appropriate it. Why does he say this in verses 1 through 11? What's his point? What does he say? What about wisdom is there that should make Solomon's son and us want to live our lives characterized by wisdom instead of our own thoughts or something else?
Say that again.
Okay.
Better than anything else we could hope for.
Okay. Let's start with verses 1 through 3. Let's do that. What does it mean? What image do you get of where wisdom is when she calls out and asks people to listen to her? Where does it say she's at?
She's beside the gates at the opening to the city.
Atop a hill.
And
Okay.
wasn't that a respectful place? I mean, wasn't that where a lot of things were done at the gates of the city?
Yeah.
So it's
And it's sort of, you picture her also posted there at the entrance of the gate. So if you want to go into the city, you're going to pass her. And where else is she? So she's in many places, okay? So there's wisdom. Picture, that's, if I did a PowerPoint, I'd have put like someone holding a picture that says wisdom standing at different places. So you go into a city and wisdom is standing there with a sign that says, got wisdom? She's standing there, okay? And what's,
On top of a hill or a high elevated place.
okay.
at the crossroads where the paths meet, she takes her stand.
Okay, so we have 3 places. So this is poetry. Poetry is not like reading just a straight narrative or reading a list of laws. He's trying to paint a picture in your mind. When you're going along the way, whatever way that is, and you see a hill by the side of the road or off in the distance, you see wisdom standing there with a sign that says, got wisdom? With a question mark. And when you go to a crossroad, you go to an intersection. Whenever you go to an intersection, you see wisdom standing there, like a homeless person, but not like a homeless person, with a sign that says, got wisdom? And then when you go into the city, when you leave here and cross over Martin Way and go into Lacey, she's standing there in the median with a sign that says, got wisdom? So she's everywhere. What is he trying to tell us with all these different, wherever you go, she happens to be there. What's he trying to say to us?
Well, obviously, it's important because it's where you're going to see her. She's going to be right there.
Okay. All right.
Wisdom is for everyone, not just the elite or the high-ups, it's for everyone.
Okay. It's important. It's everywhere. You need it for everywhere you go. It's important for everyone. And what did you say, Claudia?
To stop and think, if wisdom is everywhere, then maybe you need to take that minute to pause and think, and wisdom will be there when you need it.
Okay. Anyone else have any other thoughts? Tim?
Yeah, wisdom's kind of like, like you said, you come to a crossroads or you're making a decision. You can make a decision, oh, this is for me, this road's for doing what God wants, or this road over here. Wisdom's kind of that stop and think, and it's, if you're gonna sin, it's the way of escape. You can't, there's a verse in the New Testament,
Okay? Anyone else have any other thoughts? Yeah.
Just looking at the contrast between the way wisdom is there, crossroads at many places, calling out, and the prostitute who was on every street corner lying in wait, or in the market, basically hiding, seeking to snag somebody unaware.
I think that when you think about this imagery he's painting, because so this is poetry, it's full of this imagery, and you think about this everywhere you go in your normal day-to-day life, as you're, to put this in a modern context, as you're driving down I-5 in the morning, on the hill off to the side, wisdom is standing there. As you are driving through the city and you come to an intersection, you're waiting for the green turn arrow, wisdom is standing there next to the homeless person with a sign that says, "Got wisdom." And when you're going from one city to another, wisdom. So wisdom is everywhere you go in your normal everyday life. I think, and the first verse says, doesn't wisdom call? Doesn't understanding raise her voice? And then his point with all these locations is wisdom is everywhere calling out to people to appropriate her and make her part of them. What he's getting at is godly, if you're a believer, godly wisdom should infuse and inform everything you do in your life and how you do it and why you do it. It should be God's worldview and mindset and moral compass should be the compass that energizes your heart and that helps you live a godly life in everything you do, wherever you go. Our faith isn't supposed to be something that we just bottle up very tightly and keep here on Sundays. It's supposed to be something that shapes our life, which means it shapes how we work, the kind of ethic we bring to how we do our work, the way we treat people, the way we interact with people, the kind of employee we are, the kind of husband and wife we are, et cetera, et cetera. It's supposed to shape everything we do wherever you go in your life. It's not supposed to be something that's bottled up. And I really do understand how difficult it can be to try and be a faithful Christian and still be winsome and persuasive and a positive Christian in a secular world. I work full-time, I work for the state in a very politically correct environment, but it's possible to do and it can be done. You're not supposed to make your faith this private thing that's bottled up in a Tupperware container by your front door that you just pick up with you on Sunday morning. It's supposed to be something that informs everything you do in life and how you do it and why you do it. Or standing right next to wisdom is, like Brian said, is the lady dressed like that, or any other millions of temptations that Satan knows you're liable to slip on that he's putting there, and you have choices to make. Are you going to live a life characterized by wisdom, or are you going to live it characterized by your own thoughts and your own desires and your own inclinations? Which one is it that you're going to do? And he's always calling his son to follow God's wisdom. Solomon's made those mistakes, and they didn't work out well for him. It destroyed his entire family. Ralph.
Okay, the illustration, knowledge, you gain knowledge by experience.
Yeah.
Burn yourself, how, and if you do that again, wisdom says, maybe another opportunity to burn yourself, wisdom says, you sure you want to do that? Getting to that point where you have to make a decision, I want to get burned again, or should I move on? This young man in the previous chapter didn't have any experience or any kind of wisdom. After those experiences, he's either going to be destroyed or he's going to learn from that experience and say, I'm not going to let that happen again because this wasn't a good experience, so I'm not going to do that again. And his dad's right, trying to help him understand the point is that this is what will happen to you if you do these things. But most kids, it's like saying, don't do that, but don't push that button, but most often they do. And then after that, it's knowledge, which you learn from that experience. Wisdom says, don't do it again. Inexperience or lack of knowledge says, well, yeah, I didn't learn well enough to do it again. And so it's the knowledge and wisdom.
Yeah, I think the reason why older people have a lot to teach younger people is they've made mistakes already. Like they've done the same stupid things that you're thinking of doing, or you think everything will turn out great, but they've tried something similar and it really didn't turn out well. So you should listen and learn from their mistakes. And wisdom does come from making mistakes. And one example that I thought of, if you think about how do you take this idea of godly wisdom and living a life, godly principles with a Christian worldview, how do you take that, and what's an example of what that looks like in the real world? Because I manage the regulatory, not the criminal, but the regulatory investigations unit for my agency, when we have, I don't know why, but you have people who sell insurance. Usually people call them insurance agents, but for some reason at our agency 10 years ago, we stopped calling them agents and we call them insurance producers now because they produce insurance. It makes sense to someone. Anyway, it doesn't matter. So when you have, we investigate agents. I'm not going to use the word producers. We investigate agents, we investigate agencies, and we investigate insurance companies who do bad things or unfair practices and fraudulent activities and everything else. But when we have agents who do bad things and the investigation determines they did something wrong and it goes to the attorneys and the attorneys look at it and they agree and they propose some sort of fine or they revoke their license or they propose something proportional, needs to be done. It goes to an enforcement group, which sounds very sinister, sort of like James Bondish, this evil, sinister group that decides on people's fates. It's not really that sinister. So there's 5 people that vote on, the attorney makes a recommendation, this is what happened, these are the facts, this is what the investigation found, this is what I think should be done, and 5 people vote on what should happen. You have me, because I run the investigations unit, you have the deputy commissioner in charge of the legal division, which I'm part of, so my direct boss, you have the deputy commissioner in charge of consumer protection, and the manager under her in charge of licensing, and then we have the attorney, the manager who manages the attorney. So you have 5 people. And in this particular case, the case was there was a woman who came here when she was 16 years old from Mexico illegally. So she came here illegally. She's now a legal citizen. She's married and has children, so she's now a legal citizen of the United States. But 8 years ago, before she was a legal resident, she was still illegal, she applied for a license to sell insurance. And she provided a fake Social Security number for the application so she could get her license. So they gave her a license. But the Social Security number is fake. And this was found out because now that she's a citizen, she tried to update her license and update her personal info. And they asked, well, why is her Social Security number changing? And they said, well, I wasn't a legal resident before, and I had on a green card or something, and so the number changed, and they're like, that doesn't make any sense. So they found out she basically wrote a letter and said, listen, I wasn't a legal resident, I am now, I wanted to sell insurance, I gave a number, and I did it, and I'm sorry, but she's selling insurance for 8 years, she's had no complaints. Her employer, AAA, her AAA agency she works for, wrote a letter saying, oh, she's wonderful, she's great, she's a hard worker, please don't take her license away, she's a great asset, and all these other wonderful, nice things. So what should be done with this person? How do you apply godly wisdom to this issue? How do you do that? What are you supposed to do? Should you say, it was bad and shouldn't have done it, but she's been selling insurance for 8 years under false pretenses. And they don't like to give, one of the main things we like to do is we don't like to give people licenses if they're deceptive or evil or do bad things. So how can you let her keep her license if she's been selling insurance for 8 years under false pretenses? She should never even have had a license. Maybe she's a nice person, but who cares, So you have that, and then you have, she was in a bad situation, she made a mistake, she's obviously had no complaints, her employer loves her, and so I'm sitting there thinking, what on earth should we do with this person? The attorney recommends, just a $250 fine and tell her not to do it again. That's what the attorney recommends. The attorney's a very sweet lady, so that's what she recommends. And then you have the licensing manager who says, this is ridiculous. take her license away. She should, she lied. And who knows, maybe it's not even her social security number. Where are all the taxes going? For everything. He's very, very upset. It's like, no, revoke her. And so now we have these two wide gulfs of opinion. So how do you apply godly wisdom to something like this? I mean, justice needs to be done. God believes in justice. God doesn't believe in just saying, oh, it's all right, we'll just pretend it never happened. If that was his point, he wouldn't have sent Jesus to die for our sins. He is willing to forgive us, but a price still must be paid. And just because God forgives us for doing stupid things, it doesn't mean we don't have consequences. Look at David. We'll just look at the example of the man who commits adultery from chapter 6. So there's consequences, so we shouldn't just do nothing. But then there's also the idea of forgiveness. God does give people second chances. So what on earth are we supposed to do with this? I'm not going to tell you what we do with it. So why? What would you do? What would you do? What would you do?
That's right. Go and sin no more.
That's what I was thinking of. I was thinking of the woman caught in adultery, and I was thinking, I was like, oh, you're right. I can't get away from this theme today. Well, I'm glad we're on wisdom now. So, but I was thinking of the woman caught in adultery. I'm thinking, so basically what I'm saying is, we had other people there. Some of the other voting members were thinking like, oh, we don't want to revoke her. We don't want to really touch this issue because immigration's a touchy thing. And the governors put out all these things about how obviously this is a blue state. They don't like immigration issues. We don't even want to touch it. Let's do something small and get it out of here. And I didn't even care about that. All I'm thinking about is what is the just thing to do? And I'm thinking in godly categories. I'm sitting there thinking, what is the just thing to do here? What would the Bible, I'm literally thinking, what would the Bible have me do? How would the Bible have me vote in this situation? So that's an example. What I'm talking about is your faith isn't supposed to be locked away for Sunday. It should be something that informs what you do in your life. I'm sitting there with these other bureaucrats, and I don't care about what Governor Inslee's policies on immigration are. I'm thinking, what is the just thing to do? What would God have me do in this situation? So Tim and then Ralph.
Okay, the problem is, if I did that, you argue this is what would happen, and that's gotta be treated the same way.
Yeah. Yeah, so that's true. We had people bring up that point. I mean, it's very true.
Everything there, it shows people that you can lie, steal, and cheat.
Yeah.
And you get your hands slapped.
Yeah.
We can all do this.
That's what the licensing manager said. Yeah, you sound like the licensing manager. That's what he said. So, Ralph, what were you going to say?
I was thinking of someone who made a decision to notice came from find out who was the real mother. He decided, let's cut the baby in half each, so that the real mother would expose herself and say, no, they live. That's a drastic thing to do, to make a decision. If you say, this is our president, this is our country of laws, immigration policy is all about, we're going to enforce the laws, or we're just going to, but same type of thing, but it takes a stand, let's use the real law,
Yeah.
or use the law. I want to run through a red light just because, I just feel like running through a red light. There's a law there, and you see there's consequences.
Yeah, you're right. The point is not necessarily to go down a rabbit hole about immigration, which is what we did for 20 minutes before we got back on track in our meeting at work. Is I'm thinking, how would God have me respond to this? So I voted to, and of course they asked me first. I wanted to be asked last, so I could see, but instead they asked me first, and I said I voted for a multi-thousand-dollar fine and to be on probation for a year. That's what I voted for. So the fine may be too much, and she may have to give up her license. And if it isn't too much, it'll hurt a lot. And then if she has any complaints for a year, her license is going to be pulled anyway. So that's what I voted for. And there's 5 of us, so 2 people voted to revoke and destroy, and 2 other people agreed with me. So the attorney now has to go negotiate with the lady and see if she's going to accept the terms or not. But that's basically what's going to happen. So in the what's that?
If she doesn't accept the terms, then she's just out.
Yeah. Yeah. So, and the licensing manager and the consumer protection, the deputy for consumer protection, the licensing commander was very upset, and he like stormed out and was very angry. He was outraged. But I still sometimes think maybe I should have made a different decision. But the point is that I'm trying to apply godly wisdom to a totally secular situation. It's not your faith and its implications isn't something that should be locked away in your backpack 6 days a week. It should be something that informs how you live your life. And that's just a small example of what that looked like for me during this past week. And you have your own examples, you have your own lives that look very different from mine, but wherever you are in your life and whatever your life looks like, you have to make decisions every day, and you need to try to make those decisions characterized by wisdom, because everywhere you go, at every intersection, at every hillside you pass, and at the entrance to every city, she's standing there, along with everyone else who wants to get your attention, with a sign that says, "Got wisdom," and you have to make a decision on what is going to be the thing that gives you purpose and fuel for how you live your life. What is it going to be? Solomon wants his son to choose wisdom.
Good answer. Yeah, I'd like to, there's the punishment, that it's going to hurt, obviously, but then there's grace shown as well. And that's what grace is sufficient for us. And that sounds like a very biblical, just.
Yeah, it sounds, I'm still not quite sure if I did the right thing. But anyway, it's an example. So we have 5 minutes left. We'll go through the end of verse 11. Okay, so she's out there. He's saying, doesn't wisdom call? Doesn't she raise her voice? Basically saying, wisdom is there. It's available. He's talking to people who claim to be believers. She's there. She's available. Everywhere you go, there she is. So what are you going to do? Which one are you going to choose? And then in verses 4 through 11, he says a bunch of things about her. What does he say about her? It says she's calling and asking people in verses 4 through 5. I'm calling to everyone, learn prudence, learn sense, here I am. What does she say she has to offer in verses 6 through 9? Verses 6 through 9. What does she have to offer people who come to her?
She speaks of noble things.
Okay, so noble things.
Right things, truth.
Okay.
Righteousness.
Direct and straightforward.
Okay.
Wickedness is an abomination.
Nothing perverse.
Okay. These are the things that wisdom will offer to God's people. Now, there are plenty of people who profess to be believers, but they totally compartmentalize their lives. And godly wisdom has little to nothing to do with how they live their life. And it's not like they're trying to be evil people, but he is calling for wisdom to influence everything you do in your life and how you live your life. Wisdom will teach people noble things, teach people truth about God and the implications of the gospel and how you should act in situations, and give you prudence and wisdom. Teach you righteous things. There's nothing crooked. There's nothing. What does verse 9 mean? They are all straight to him who understands, and right to those who find knowledge. What is he getting at here? Or what's wisdom getting at here? Okay, he says, they are all straight. So everything I'm telling you is straight, it's good. It's not straight, meaning it's not perverse and crooked. To who is it straight? Who is it straight to? In verse 9. To him who what? To those who understand. All the things that wisdom has to teach you make sense if you understand what's behind it. What is he getting at here? What is he saying? Why would someone not understand? Why would someone not want godly wisdom? Why would it be stupid to someone? To unbelievers. He's getting across this idea of spiritual illumination. He's saying, if you're one of God's people, if you're truly one of God's people who wants to love him, wants to serve him because you love him, you should want the things that wisdom has to offer you. And that doesn't mean that you're going to follow it all the time. Solomon certainly didn't. None of us have been perfect in the past week. We've all done stupid things, hopefully less stupid things than the week before, but we all fall short and do foolish things or have made mistakes. But when you talk about motivation and heart and desire, all of these things that wisdom is out there saying, this is what I have to offer you. This is what I have for you. Wisdom is offering all of these things, and if you are one of his children, if you're one of God's children, then these things are straight, meaning they're good, and they're right. And you should want to have wisdom instead of following after something else. Any thoughts on that? Verses 10 and 11, and we'll wrap up. He sort of wraps up and says the same thing he said before in the last 7 chapters, how godly wisdom is much more important than any money that you'll ever get. Take my instruction instead of silver, and knowledge rather than choice gold, for wisdom is better than jewels, and all that you desire cannot compare with her. And he's getting across this idea that what is it that actually matters in life? If you're one of God's people, one of God's children through repentance and faith in who Jesus is and what he's done, if that's true, then the most important, most precious thing in the world to you should be to please your great God and Savior. And you do that by living a life characterized by the gospel and all its implications for your life, and who God is and what he wants from you, and how you should think about things, and what you should think about morality, what you should think about the issues of the day. You should live a life characterized by wisdom and godly knowledge, because that's much more important than a life characterized by money, or characterized by sex, or characterized by any one of a million other things that are out there in this marketplace of ideas at the corner standing next to wisdom with her sign. You should want what godly wisdom offers you instead of those other things. It's not that those other things don't feel good or taste good. It's that godly wisdom is much more important than any of those things. And if you do have godly wisdom, your life will be a life usually characterized by more peace and more grace and blessing from God and the peace that accompanies it. That's what he's trying to get his son to understand. And he keeps repeating it over and over because we need to have lots of reminders. If you've had children, you all know that. Any thoughts about 1 through 11? Gloria.
Since wisdom became incarnate in Jesus Christ, as it concludes, nothing can be compared with Jesus.
That's important. And we're going to talk next week. We're going to talk about whether, especially in verse 22 through 31, a lot of people think that this whole Proverbs chapter 8 is actually about Christ. A lot of people think that. I don't think it is, but a lot of people do. And there's a very awful, false, wrong teaching about Christ that some people got from Proverbs 8:22 to 31 from a wrong understanding of it that we can talk about next week. But this is a really important chapter, and the reason why Christ is full of wisdom is because Christ is God. Christ is God. He has God's attributes and perfections, and That's why Christ has so much wisdom. That's why God has so much wisdom. And what Solomon's trying to do is to call his son to live a life characterized by that. And we read, if you know 1 Kings and Chronicles, you know that Rehoboam didn't listen to this very well. But maybe you and I can listen to it a little better than he did. And okay, it's 10:30 on the dot. How about that? Any other questions or anything? All right, we'll pray. Since I forgot to pray at the beginning, hopefully I won't be struck dead for that. We can pray and get ready for our service. Dear Lord, we come to you today in Jesus' name. Lord, I pray you can prepare our hearts and minds for the service to come. I pray we can want to live lives characterized by wisdom and godly wisdom, knowledge, and understanding. Please search our lives and our thoughts and help us to think about where we need to apply godly wisdom to our lives and the issues that we have to deal with tomorrow, this coming week, and all the weeks to come. In Jesus' name we pray.